Welcome. It's Wednesday once again. It's time for Catalog and Cocktails, your honest, no BS, non-salesy conversation about enterprise data management. I am a longtime data nerd and product guy, Tim Gasper, and joined by my co-host, Juan.
Hey, Tim. I'm Juan Cacao. I'm the principal scientist at Data.world. And as always, it's Wednesday, middle of the week, end of the Wednesday, and time to take a break and chat about data and all the fun stuff that we always do. And today we're going to continue our conversation a little bit like last week, which was about graphs, but it's going to be graphs and more than graphs. And it's going to be about open source. And we have an awesome guest for this topic, which is Denise Gosnell. Denise is the Chief Data Officer of Datasacks. Denise, how are you?
It's Wednesday, and I absolutely love Juan and Tim, what you guys are doing here. So this is quite a fabulous end of the Wednesday because I'm on the East Coast. So I'm doing great.
Awesome. Denise and I, we've kind of known each other for a long time. We meet at conferences. Well, when we met at conferences, but
yeah, when we did, yeah,
times a year. Denise did her PhD in computer science. A lot of work in graphs. She has a book on graphs. So if there's somebody who knows about graphs, who knows about data, knows about open source, I think Denise is on the top of that list in the world. And I'm just so excited to have you here today. And let's go chat about.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and I mean, I'm pretty sure you've been incredibly busy too with your recent book out on knowledge graphs. So between the two of us, we've got it covered.
Exactly. So what are we drinking and what are we toasting for today?
All right, so this is critical. I'm drinking LaCroix, but it's the best flavor of LaCroix. This is apricot LaCroix, which is clearly the top flavor. And I am toasting to new approaches and new strategies. Juan, we were talking about this. This is the one thing I had bookmarked on my calendar after my sabbatical. I just had a nice 3-month break where I disconnected. I was doing a ton of hiking. We can talk about that if you want. But yeah, just new approaches and new ideas. That's what I'm toasting to today.
Awesome. Tim, how about you?
I am today drinking just a regular old-fashioned, but I got a special set of bitters in it. These workhorse rye salted cacao bitters, and they're pretty tasty. So it's salted cacao. And you know what? First of all, I'll cheers to new approaches. That's awesome. And
Yeah.
I will also cheers to actually one of my coworkers is going on a sabbatical starting next week. And that sounds awesome. So I'm going to cheers to sabbaticals.
Absolutely.
Well, I think we're going to be toasting for sabbaticals because I would love to take a sabbatical a couple of years, but yeah, I'm going to follow your footsteps, Denise. I just made this up. Always look to figure out what's in my refrigerator, my bar. Jalapeno, passion fruit syrup, cucumber vodka, and I think one of the best sparkling waters now, which is AHA cucumber and strawberry. I think this beats your apricot LaCroix, Denise.
That is number 2 in my house, and that exact flavor is. So
you have that too?
I'm with you.
All right. Well, cheers to sabbaticals and to really interesting sparkling waters. All right. So we got our warm-up question today. This is, what open source tool best personifies your personality?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can't answer graph because that's going to be like way too obvious. So I'm going to go with Apache Airflow. And I'm going with Apache Airflow because it's connecting data sources together for managing your data, your data tasks, etc. And I mean, who doesn't love anything more than connected data? I, of course, love connecting data. So yeah, I'm going with Apache Airflow, and I freaking love it.
How about you, Tim?
Is Jupyter open source?
It's a great question.
I know Zeppelin is, so I'm gonna say Jupyter, even if it's maybe not open source potentially. I think it is. Maybe it's not Apache. Maybe that's the thing. Because it's analytical, it's collaborative, and it's not super fancy. You know, it's no frills. It's practical, right? So I'm Jupyter.
I'm gonna go do to my roots. So Apache Jenna, and Jenna is the RDF semantic web framework, which also has a graph database. So it's about having the database, right? It can be all about connect data too, but you also have this framework, right? It gives you this way how to go establish how to best manage all your data. So there we go. All about connections.
Hey,
here.
we could get some real work done with, you know, we got Jupyter here, we got a graph database, we got Airflow. Man, we could do some stuff.
All right.
This is getting way too serious now, guys. No real work.
All right. So it's time to get a little bit more serious, but honest and no BS. So Denise, honest, no BS. What is this future of open source and data going to look like? Is it going to be just Apache Jenna and Airflow and Jupyter notebooks, or what?
That is the three of us are ready to take the future. That's all we need. Okay, so what does the future of open source data look like? If I had to really pick one central theme, I would love for it to be much more transparent. And I'm thinking, when I say transparent, I'm seeing transparency from the full data stack, all the way from just being able to understand how you fit into these algorithms when you're a consumer of different data services or people you know are using your data, all the way down to having transparency and observability into how they're performing. So to me, the future of open source data is really going to be at the heart of transparency. Like, for example, I'm thinking even transparency all the way into how like recommendation algorithms work for, say, your favorite social media site. Because these algorithms, the way that they are right now, they're really convergent. So as a consumer of these sites, the way that they work, it's kind of pushing people to the same type of content or the same set of content. So when I say convergent, that's what I mean. And it just would be really nice if it was transparent as to how it was working, and it was transparent to how, or to like which sets of content are becoming very popular. And then maybe even transparent to where you could change how content is delivered to you, so you can get out of, you know, purposely being put into a silo. So when I'm talking about transparency at the end, I'm already thinking at that level. And then as all of us being engineers and data practitioners, it would be really great if it was a lot easier to see the basic performance metrics of any data API, be it like scalability or its throughput or just the payloads that are failing when it's trying to go through. I mean, just transparency all around. I think our entire system right now is very opaque into how data is used, and I would just love for it to start to be a little bit more observable.
So I like how you're going with this on transparency goes into so many different aspects, right? So the consumer is accessing some data, whatever, through some open source tool, right? It could be, and I want to understand how that works. So transparency over there, all the way down to like the actual storage engines, and figure out how that works and what's going underneath the hood. So we don't have this level of transparency right now. So is that your point, that we're lacking that transparency right now?
That we're lacking it right now, absolutely, to the place you just mentioned, all the way down to the database, but then all the way up to the end consumer understanding how their data is being used, how to remove their data from it, or even being able to see how content is being put in front of them, and maybe creating a divisive environment or putting them into a silo that they don't want to be in. Like transparency all the way from the top to the bottom.
So not
Make
just
sense?
Observability and transparency, or transparency in terms of observability, but also lineage seems to also be something you're talking about.
Yes.
Here. Maybe technical lineage in one respect, but also sort of the business lineage in another.
Absolutely, yes. And you just hit on another like soapbox topic for me, and it's data provenance and not having transparency into the provenance of some data. And when we talk about data provenance, we're just talking about where it came from, where it's going, who owns it, how it changed, all of that. So Tim, absolutely.
And I think part of this whole transparency we want to get is also on the privacy aspect, right? So we want to go is how our data is being used. In the provenance, where is it coming from, and where is it going to go to? So what are right now the open source tools or systems out there that are focusing on this type of observability, on privacy, on transparency?
That's a really great question. And the only thing I'm thinking of right now is what Charity Majors is doing at Honeycomb. what they're going after for creating observability more into the lower part of the stack with observability into API performance or different backend engineering items. That's the only one I'm really thinking of at the moment. On the other side of the transparency debate or transparency argument, I think we run into it all the time. It's whenever you go to a website and all of a sudden now, because of GDPR and other compliance issues, there's that pop-up that's like, are you okay with cookies? And we're all like, yeah, we're fine. But if you happen to be the person who's not, Juan, when was the last time you tried to look at a cookies setting, look at your cookie setting on a website and then change it?
Yeah, I don't do this.
It's incredibly difficult because there's just not an easy way to figure out how cookies are tracking your information, where it's going, and the different ways that you can limit how much they have to track, maybe to even just the minimal. And if you select only minimal cookies, what does that still mean? Like, there's not even transparency at that aspect. And I know you asked about tools, and I don't really know if I have a ton of answers there, because maybe that's the future of what we need to create for our market. But yeah, when I think of transparency, I first think of Honeycomb and what they're doing in the back end. And then I think of the day-to-day consumer problem when we have no idea what these cookies are tracking about ourselves.
So is this about creating more, or like, are there lack of we need new tools, or existing tools need to be able to go add more transparency to them? Or is it both? Because I mean, you can boil how much you want to go boil the ocean or not? That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah. The answer at the end of the day is going to end up being both. And I see fewer tools for the latter problem I described. I see fewer tools that are educating consumers on the transparency of their data usage. Because as we're having this conversation, I'm thinking about Grafana. I mean, that's a really great tool for observability into your backend systems and performance metrics, et cetera. And there's probably plenty more. I don't know if anyone is on Twitter or on YouTube or LinkedIn, because we can see your comments. If any of you guys are thinking of some, let us know, and put them in, because we can see them here. But I don't know, Tim, Juan, do you guys know of any tools that are solving the problem on the consumer side, making it transparent to where the data is going?
There's some open source libraries and things like that that are interesting around sort of, certain types of scanning and things like that. Like for example, I've been looking a lot into sort of PI related sensitive data scanning and things like that. And like, there's some interesting libraries and things out there, but like, there isn't a ton in terms of like big projects. In terms of observability, you got stuff like Great Expectations, for example, which is a little more on the testing side, right?
Okay.
And then, but like in terms of like data monitoring, data observability, it just seems like in general, like lineage observability. I mean, you've got some open source metadata things out there like Adminson and things like that. It just seems like data quality, observability, transparency, it has tended not to turn into a lot of open source tooling, really, at least not in a flexible, broad way, right? Like, there's like Atlas and that sort of project on the Hadoop side, but I don't know if that's really, going a lot of places right now, right?
And maybe that's why this is the future of data, right? Like, so if people want to invest on creating some tools that companies and teams are going to pick up and want to use right away, I would heavily bet that this area is going to be fast growing in the next 5 years or so.
So let me go take this to kind of the area of who's going to be the user of these tools. So if they don't exist, an open source tool around observability, right? Or they don't exist because people haven't realized that we need them, or is it because why spend my time on this? There's already commercial tools out there. Like, at the end of the day, who are the consumers of these open source tools? Because maybe for enterprises who actually have that problem, I'm kind of starting with that premise, they're not going to go use open source for that. I'm just going to have a commercial tool vendor around it.
I mean, that's a great question, and happy to kind of toss some ideas around. So,
go.
The first place I would look would be just the space of enforcing GDPR. So let's say that you as a company, well, if you are supporting customers in the EU, you better be doing this. But you have to have pathways and ways to enable any user to request all their information and delete it, right? That's GDPR. I think one of the first ways that we could create more observability around that question would be a tool for your data teams at a company. It would be a way to more easily track and have the ability to have that provenance information readily available so that you can answer that question much more quickly. Because if I understand it now, it's mainly customized pipelines that people are making in order to answer those questions. But I mean, Tim, Juan, I don't know if you guys have any other experience there.
No, I think that's right. I mean, I think one of the things that I'm excited about, and I'm curious if you're thinking the same way, is like, I love that things like DBT are getting a lot more traction in the community, because obviously that, at its core is an open source project, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, as people start to build more open source componentry into their stack, into what they're doing from a data pipeline perspective, I feel like that's going to lend itself more towards this ecosystem expanding. Because in the end, like it'd be nice if all these things could really work well together. And maybe this kind of spawns more in that area. I don't know if that sounds right or not.
Yeah, I think that DBT would need, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not a deep DBT user, but I think that we would need maybe traceability. Maybe we should go with that word. That needs to be a new word. Data observability of systems is, going to be essentially traceability of data in a little metaphor there. I think that DBT would be really benefited if it had some type of way to understand just quickly your full lineage of a payload. I don't know if that's something it offers, but when I'm thinking about transparency and visibility into data lineage or data provenance, I'm kind of thinking that there would be a way to understand every component of the system that piece of data has traced through. And that's essentially, at the end of the day, the question you need to answer for GDPR. For this customer, I need a quick map everywhere that their data has touched.
Yeah, I think there's a project like Open Lineage, right? I think our friends from Datakin, I think those are the ones who've been kind of pushing this open source, or kind of like call it the kind of a almost a vocabulary, a schema to be able to go define open lineage about all your jobs and stuff. But actually, it was interesting that our conversation is heading more into like the interoperability of metadata, because at the end of the day, the metadata is when it's going to explain us how all this real data is moving around, right? And I think one of the things that we really need is, I want to have a way, an open source or open approach to be able to connect all my different tools around. Because at the end of the day, you're not going to have one tool, one silver bullet that's going to go do everything for you, right? All the way from, let's go integrate data. I mean, you'll have all these different things, right? You have, I mean, look at the modern data stack, right? You have your ETL tools, your DBT, right? You got your reverse ETL now vendors, and you got your data warehouses, you got your Airflows, you got your a bunch of open source and commercial tools. And there's just like so much stuff that you need to go pick and choose from. And how do I go connect all this stuff together? You connect it right now is writing custom code, or you have this thing connects only to these 3 tools and so forth. So I want to have an open way to say, look, I'm going to plug in a data quality tool. I'm going to plug in a PII tool. Tomorrow, I'm probably going to swap it or not or whatever. I just want to have that interoperable way of bringing in any type of data that deals with, any type of system that deals with metadata. And that open approach is what's going to be able to let me go do that traceability. So I don't think it's more about having another software system. I think it's more about having an open approach to kind of describe metadata. That's my position now.
Yeah, and I mean, knowledge graphs solve that perfectly, don't they, Juan?
Well, yes, I believe so.
Well, yes, they do.
I mean, this is why I always argue that your first knowledge graph is better be of your metadata. You want to be able to go connect all your metadata together, so I know not just that I know what's out there from what sources I have, but also how things connect and flow together. And then later on, you can go do more stuff with the rest of your data. But I think an organization should think about, when we think about connected data, in reality, go understand how your metadata is connected, and actually the people And that's the other thing. It's not just about like the bits in your system. It's actually the people within the organization, because at the end of the day, when we talk about GDPR, it's because there is a government. There's a government who's asking for this. There's a person who's asking for this. It's people. It's a social technical phenomenon. It's not just about technology.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think so. The original question that we were chasing, one, which I thought was a really good one, which was who are going to be the consumers of this open source tech to create transparency, and we kind of dove into potentially what the world of data engineers and data operators, like the data teams inside these companies, what that could look like. And I'm going back to this point because some of the comments coming in here from LinkedIn are starting to highlight what type of transparency people want on the other side. Someone here is talking about who can solve this problem, but I just want to know who's collected cookies about my browser behavior. Absolutely. I think that's a really great comment. I think that's Rodney brought that in. So thank you for that, because that type of solution is absolutely the type of transparency into your data usage that people just want to know. And one more step after that is I want to easily be able to go to this site and understand how to control and change those preferences. Now, that's not exactly a data transparency and observability problem, but that is definitely an information architecture issue that is out there right now, that is right at the edge of the data community.
And we have I just see it as a LinkedIn user, right? Not another metadata system, but a metadata ecosystem where I can place and replace the tools I want, plug, play, unplug.
Absolutely.
You nailed it. That's exactly what I was thinking about. It's not a system, right? It's the ecosystem. I want to be able to have an ability to that connective tissue that I can go plug in and play any type of system that's going to be using my data, and to understand how the data is being used is I need to go connect that metadata. Mm-hmm. So I'm liking where we're heading on. Like I was not thinking about transparency kind of being the future of open source and data, but I think it's if it's transparency, it's about let's make our metadata first-class citizens and make it interoperable, and not just go buy and go get all these tools and plug them together by hand wiring and writing code and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like maybe we've got some of our foundation now, right? We've got our databases and our data warehouses. We have some of our data pipelining. We've got our orchestration with things like Airflow and Daxter and things like that, right? And so maybe, as you're kind of noting, Denise, the next frontier here is really more the meta layer, right? It's the observability, the transparency, the lineage, it's understanding. And the more that enterprises and companies can understand their own data, perhaps the better that they'll actually be able to help consumers be able to understand what the hell that they're, is being tracked about them and things like that. Because if a company can't answer the question themselves, how can they be, how are they going to then actually, serve the consumer in this situation?
Yeah, absolutely, Tim. And to the person, I can't see who it is on this one, but there was someone who commented in and said, are there enough people scared enough by this today? And Tim, to your point, I think that there is a growing motivation to make this more tractable for inside businesses and eventually to consumers. And I think we're getting more pull today from the consumer side. And that's where you're starting to see the explainable AI movement really come into play, with people wanting to understand, what is this algorithm doing for me and how do I really fit in? And that ties back to when we were first talking about this, and I was doing a really poor job of just describing how these recommendation algorithms, they converge content, or they converge your experience to sets of content instead of continually refreshing it to a more diverse, maybe collection of the full sampling. And we feel that anytime we're on the internet today, when it feels like it's incredibly tense to have a conversation because it's painted a picture that there's side A versus side B. And that just happens to be a byproduct of algorithms that are maybe optimized to put people optimized for click-through rates and optimized for time on page. It creates this silo and division that actually might not exist in the real world, but that's a part of our digital experience now. Tim, I just thought that your commentary on that really fit in with where explainable AI is being pulled from us, the data practitioners and tool builders, from the consumers.
Is there any open source explainable AI system, whatever that would even mean? I'm
I
curious.
think that's going to be Tim, Denise, and Juan Co. 2026.
Yeah. Is there a really good explainable AI period right now?
Is any AI explainable anywhere? Can we just give us one example of
Well,
explainable AI?
well, symbolic AI, like rule-based AI, is definitely going to be explainable, right? But now we have all these black boxes and stuff. I think that's something that I think that's another thing that we need to kind of just as practitioners, as a community, is like, okay, we get all this AI stuff and we're using it on my data, right? So, okay, I understand how the data flowed, but then suddenly the data flowed into this box and something came out of that. So I understood that it came to this box and came out. What happened in that box? We literally had this beautiful flow of how things are going, and then suddenly it just disappeared, and then something came out. We don't know what happened. So I think if we're thinking about this transparency, AI is taking this big part of it. We're gonna just magic happens, and then continue. And what are we just gonna buy that? Is that okay? I think the consumers are really need to have to go push on this and saying, I want to know more about this. Tell me more.
I do think that they need to push on it. And yes, like all the claps to what you just said. And I think that the first area that we hit so often and have that muscle memory of just saying, oh, I accept. The first way we run into this every day is with cookies. Tell me what you're doing with my data, with collecting of these cookies, and just give me an answer for that, because it's an experience that is in my face every day, and you should have a solution for. Let's just start the conversation there, because I think that's one of the first mass endpoints that we could get some pull going in the community for making things a little bit more explainable. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting topic. I think at some point we should set up a follow-up where all we do is just talk about AI, explainable AI, because there's so much interesting stuff to unpack there.
Absolutely.
Just to take us in a slightly different direction, as we think about all these different open source tools and this ecosystem, there's a lot out there. There's so much to really absorb as a developer that wants to either contribute to these things or wants to use these different things. As you're thinking about this community and all these things that are out there, and even from your own experiences working with these tools, how do you start? Like, how do you learn? Where do you learn?
Well, how to start is a very simple answer from my perspective, and it's to start with some empathy. To start with empathy for the developers, for any person around this massive loop of data. And it's important to start with empathy because we're all showing up with really hard problems to solve and other things going on. And that's just going to create more productive conversations for solving these problems. So that's where I would start, Tim. So what was the second part of your question?
And then, how do you learn? How do you really build your skills and your focus in this area?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is coming from bias perspective because it's one of the ways I like to learn. If you want to get involved in any area here, pick a data problem to solve. And really diving in end to end to solve that problem is going to be one of the best ways to get experience and to understand very deeply how certain tools are useful in solving problems or not in solving certain problems. And so when you pick up a certain business initiative and you go to solve it end to end, you really, really become deeply familiar with all these topics we're talking about when it comes to data provenance and tracking your data through the system. And what Juan was mentioning for having a really solid solution for tracking metadata. So the first place to start is to solve a real problem. And my second piece of advice on top of that is to pick a problem to solve or to align yourself with a problem to solve that has business value. Too many times I've seen really brilliant, just super kick-ass cool solutions to data problems by some of the most unique data scientists never see the light of day. And it was primarily because they weren't going after a problem that was relevant today or in the near future. And so all of their work kind of just got shelved, and no one likes that feeling, kind of going back to the idea of empathy. So Tim, those are my two pieces of advice. If you want to get started, first, pick a problem, solve it end to end with a team so you are deeply familiar with what that's like. And two, make sure that problem that you're working on is aligned to an area of business that is really going to be furthering whichever business initiative that you're working on.
So you're saying don't just pick a random tool because you heard a lot about it and it sounds really exciting and you want to build a playground of all these cool things and how they can connect together. And you're saying we shouldn't do that?
I mean, to start, if like this is day 0 and day 1, maybe not.
Oh, I love that. I mean, one of the recurring themes here is start with use cases. So this is
absolutely
more confirmation of that.
No, and this is, I think this is great advice, because if so many people get frustrated because I'm doing all this stuff and it's cool, but it doesn't make an impact. And if that's your frustration right there, then hey, you got to be honest about it, is that you have to go understand where is that business. Well, what is the business problem? Understand how the business needs it. And that's your impact. Your impact is going to be towards the business. Otherwise, you're just going to be like, okay, here's this cool researchy product. Here's the next thing, squirrel. Here's the next thing, squirrel. And then you're just going off and doing squirrel, squirrel, squirrel. And like, okay, you learn a bunch of things, but what's the impact you're going to do? Maybe you learn and that's fine. But then people want, I mean, at the end of the day, you want to go do something. You say, hey, I helped other people. Let it be I'm helping the company make more money, or I'm working on a nonprofit approach and doing something else. So I think we really need to go tie it to the end. What is the final need? I think this is really important because we forget about it. And we just focus again on this is cool tech.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, imagine that feeling of the first time you had code that was getting run in production. It's like the coolest thing ever to be like, oh, I did that. And when you start from there and you help empower the next generation of engineers and brilliant minds to be contributing to problems where you can lead them to that moment, it's going to make so many other aspects of this conversation a lot easier.
I remember when I'll be very honest, I have not contributed to open source. Yeah, I'll be honest about that.
Shame on you.
But I have, I don't know, I started contributing to code as to like my own code bases, stuff that I do a company. Right? I'm almost focusing on, well, I'm building a company in the code. And for me, it's like, oh yeah, my code's in production, but then I'm not going to go sleep because hopefully that code is working because people actually go use it. And I don't want people to be calling tomorrow at 7:00 in the morning. Why did something break? So it's fascinating, but at the same time, it doesn't let me sleep.
Well, that's the beautiful pitch for more observable data systems, by the way.
Oh, I love this. So great. So we got to focus more on transparent observability so we can actually sleep comfortably at night.
Absolutely. No one wants to be on pager duty.
Yeah, this reminds me of one of our episodes with Chris Berg about DataOps. We were talking like, why do DataOps? So I can actually have a weekend and not worry about work, right? Like that type of stuff.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Whoever ends up on that rotation to have to monitor systems, just again, apply a lot of empathy because no one really wants to be dedicating their midnight to 6 a.m. hours to that kind of work. So
I love this. Empathy.
Yep. Yep.
So let's go kind of change a little bit of topics here because one of the things that we're both passionate about is graphs.
Absolutely.
We've got to talk about graphs for one thing. And one thing I had noted here is we both love graphs and everything, but there's this other thing that we hear a lot is GraphQL. One of the annoying things something that really annoys me is there's this thing called GraphQL that has nothing to do about graphs.
Yeah.
And so where are we seeing kind of GraphQL now within the whole kind of open source and data community?
Yeah, and I'm gonna start with what is the difference because we've got
please.
We've got some folks listening and we're saying graph and now we're just adding a QL on the end and it's different. Right. So I think all up until now, when you've heard Juan and I talking about graphs, we have been talking about a specific way to look at data, a specific data structure. And it's all about the relationships in the data, just like it's all about relationships between people. That's a graph. When we're talking about GraphQL, we are talking about a way that developers can query databases from their apps Two totally different ideas. We've got a way data is structured with relationships. That's graphs. GraphQL is a way to query data from an app. So that's just to kind of level set. I want to start there. Juan,
which could be in a graph or is probably in whatever other type of storage. Again,
yeah. GraphQL works with all types of storage layers on the bottom. So it could be a graph, but not always. Actually, most often not.
Not a graph, exactly.
Yeah.
Which is the weirdest thing. So so where are we going with graph? Where is the open source community going off with GraphQL? Because you see it all over the place. Is this taking over the world or not? Is it just passing through or?
I think it's a safe bet that it is absolutely going to take over the world. I mean, for the lack of a better analogy, it's going to be the sequel of the next gen of how you work with apps and work with data in your apps. Absolutely. If that hasn't been said before, we should TM that because I think that's a really good way to explain it. It's the next sequel of working with data. So
that's a big deal.
That's a big statement.
Yeah. I would think so. And where it's going in the open source world is one of my most favorite inventions, or I don't know what the right word is, but GraphQL recently came out with data federation, which I'm pretty stoked about because now it's starting to bleed into doing neighborhoody graph things with your data. So now GraphQL is starting to try and get really close to graph structured data functionality. But where GraphQL is going with federation is something I'm pretty excited about. And what you're able to do with federation is you can write your GraphQL statement. So you're an app developer, you're using GraphQL to query your databases. And with federation, you can query your customers and then your products in separate databases. One could be, a SQL database. One could be a document DB. As long as your resolvers are working, you can just do all of this. So you can query different databases and then federate that information back together because it was related in some way, like a customer made a purchase of this product. So it's very interesting to see how GraphQL and data federation specifically is pushing the bounds of what the GraphQL query language can do up to graphy shaped problems. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing that continue to evolve. Have you worked with data federation yet, Juan or Tim?
Yeah, we do. We don't want to get salesy in here, but
in the context of our platform, but not in the context of GraphQL, unfortunately.
Yeah, no. I think again, I love how we're just going off on different topics, and this is cool. I think for the federation, for me, it comes in combination with also data virtualization, right? So you want to kind of keep your data where it is. That's why you want to go virtualize and federate. You want to go combine queries about this. They come from different sources. I see the use cases around this are more kind of from the development perspective, right? And those because you have physics, you got to move data across the wire, right? And for some use cases, it's going to be fine. For privacy reasons, maybe I need to keep the data as it is. And yes, you got to wait extra seconds, and that's fine. That's the price you go pay for privacy. And maybe for development, that's great because I can quickly see how I'm going to go integrate data. But hey, I won't be able to keep my SLAs. I'm going to have to, after I figure it out, I'm going to go materialize it. But I think that's how I'm going to see federation and virtualization is more for quick and dirty things for development. And then depending on some of the use cases, you can move that to production. But it's probably just more for development and see how it's going on. That's my perspective. I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, yes. I mean, that's where federation is right now today, is kind of in more development. Let's see how to use it. Juan, there's not really much.
What are the open source? Let's go connect it back to open source. What are the open source federation tools, systems?
Yeah. So I don't want to get salesy either. The only open source federation tool I know is one that I contribute to through my work here at Datasacks. So, and that would be Stargate. But I would love to know more if other folks out there know of other data federation open source tools. I know Apollo is working on some, of course. And just to answer a question that just came in on LinkedIn, it says, wait, GraphQL isn't just another graph query language. And that is correct. GraphQL is not another graph database query language yet.
Mm-hmm. Just on that topic of virtualization and federation really quick, would you all consider things like Presto and what else is out there? Drill and those types of things. Are those federation? I think they're definitely query engines. I guess it's all kind of a blur now. It's all kind of
Because
right?
you have
What words
federation,
do
you
you
have
use, right?
distributed queries, right? 'Cause it's in Presto, distributed SQL query engine.
Mm-hmm.
How do we all see this?
What does it mean to be a distributed SQL query engine? Can we? What is that?
It means that you're federating queries.
Virtualization and federation. Maybe it's all the same stuff, just different word choices.
Okay, it sounds like this is the next topic of emerging cool tools where we would like some more clarity. So we should put a bookmark on this one. Yeah.
I like that.
But so give it a little bit of license here on the salesy part, but because you're open source, I'd love to hear more about Stargate because I'm not familiar that much with it.
Yeah. Stargate, just think of it as like an API platform, an open source API platform that gives you the ability to work with your data, whatever endpoint way that you would like, REST, GraphQL, gRPC, you name it. It's an open source API platform that gives you any style of endpoint that you want.
And so it uses GraphQL too.
Does, yep. Yep. And I mean, right now, being that this is something that is coming out of Datasacks, the main supporting backend is Cassandra. No surprise, another open source database coming from Datasacks as well. But it's just, I don't know, it's really changed the way that developers are, accessing their data that needs to be incredibly highly available at the Cassandra level. And it's really interesting to see how people are wanting to, use data in Cassandra in a different way. Like the idea of just putting a GraphQL endpoint on top of Cassandra tables was kind of like, let's see what people do with that. But it's been pretty interesting, and you can federate data there too. But we're getting way too salesy even for my liking. So let's bring it back. Bring it back.
Well, so I have a question now on GraphQL, right? So
Okay.
maybe to take it back a little bit here. I've noticed that a lot of companies are starting to add GraphQL endpoints to things. Like, for example, I know that like Monte Carlo data has like a GraphQL endpoint in sort of the observability side. Tableau has a GraphQL endpoint. These things are kind of more on the sort of the API side in terms of like accessing the data and being able to do it in a way that like reflects and respects the relationships more and things like that. So that's interesting, right? And I'm curious, Denise, if you have a perspective on this, or if Juan, you end up having more of the perspective on this, is like, so you've got GraphQL and then you've got like graph databases and graph query engines and things like that. Like, are these things converging in the future? Are they kind of just parallel things to each other? They just both happen to have the word graph in their name?
I've got tons of opinions. Juan, don't worry.
What's going through my head right now is that given the whole popularity of GraphQL and what Denise is just telling us, that they're kind of going and doing more graphy things, I'm actually hoping that that people are going to get interested more in graph databases because of what GraphQL is trying to go do. But this is literally going through my head right now in the last 10 minutes because I didn't even know that GraphQL was doing more of these graphy things. So Denise, throw it back to you.
Yeah, I'm really excited about where GraphQL is going, and I'm closely following it and trying to contribute where I can. Right. So Tim, to your question, yes, they are converging. The first place they're converging right now is obviously by the shared name. Facebook's original reason for inventing GraphQL was to do what the graph nerds like Juan and I call neighborhood queries, which is basically like, for me or something I care about, tell me everything that's immediately connected to me. So all of my first relationships, my immediate friends. And the GraphQL query language, it does solve those problems where it's going to be able to hit one table and then query one layer out. So that's where GraphQL has kind of started. So with the name graph and the ability to do the one neighborhood out types of queries, that's in the intersection between graph databases, graph query languages, and GraphQL today. When they brought in federation, it was giving you the ability to do that same behavior of, for this really cool thing, tell me everything connected to it, but look outside my database. And that's where federation comes into play. Now, maybe Juan and I and some other, graph folks can put our heads together, because I would love to see this simple language, the way that you use the language, I would love to see it extend into actual graph style queries like paths and hierarchies. But the way that the language is specified now, it's not possible to do that. And when you start to look at how that would work technically, things get really hairy really fast. But we cannot deny that developers are pulling us in the direction of query languages that are easier to use, easier to understand, and just work within their existing app stacks. So Tim, I hope that answers your question. I could go on for way too long about GraphQL.
I think that was actually very helpful because obviously you've got like Sparkle and you've got like the GQL workstream and things like that are happening on this side, and then you've got GraphQL, and it just seems like, I mean, things will go the way they go, right? I mean, that's how this sort of space works, right? As things get mature and as more people use them, they expand, but it just seems like, GraphQL queries could be running on a graph backend. And if you want, Sparkle to be running and it to be connected to something that an API is doing, I mean, like, it just seems like in general, like, I just love that graph related stuff is continuing to get more and more adoption, regardless of how it's doing. So, I mean, that's awesome.
Absolutely. And Tim or Juan, did you guys watch the Olympics and notice Salesforce's new commercial?
I did not.
No.
Yeah, so all over NBC during the Olympics was this Salesforce commercial, or maybe it's my version of the Olympics because they're giving me targeted ads because I'm in tech. I don't know, but
because you're clicking on all the cookies, right, or something like that.
Yes. But to what Salesforce is doing, I'm really excited about this new product that they started advertising during the Olympics. I'm a big sports nerd, so that's where this part is coming into my life, but. Salesforce has this new thing called Customer 360 for your sales opportunity. And then they bring in all the connected information about it, like who works at that company, et cetera, all into one tool. And I mean, plug out to Salesforce, I guess, because I was like, yes, that is the very beginning of a graph problem, to be able to bring in information and connect all the important entities together. And major hats off if they are using GraphQL Data Federation to do it. So let us know.
Oh. So one of the things you just mentioned is that GraphQL, I think, is developers kind of enjoy because it's kind of easy, has a good developer experience. What's your position about the developer experience of graph query languages then?
Ooh. I hope that said enough. Let's just say the fact that I had to write a 400-page book to explain how to use graph query languages to solve graph problems is like 300 pages too long. That's
quantitative there.
Yeah. I mean, my heart is always going to go out to connected data. I don't know what it is about me as a person. I can't change it. I love it. And I also am probably one of like the 2 individuals on the planet who likes Gremlin, the graph query language. I'm okay being in that bucket too. But I had to go through the incredibly steep learning curve to figure out how to use Gremlin. And I am beyond honored that I got to pour my heart and brains onto 400 pages to try and teach other people. I just don't think that's a lot. Like, that's a lot of information to try and pick up a new tool that is very, very needed if you're going to have more explainable models in the future. Namely, graph databases are absolutely a part of the explainable AI movement because it helps it make much more transparent sense as to why things are the way they are in a model. But back to your question about graph query languages, they're really hard, and we haven't converged on a good solution yet. And as someone squarely in the Gremlin camp, I'm more than happy to admit that. I will love Gremlin forever, but I just don't think it's the answer for wide adoption of graph database query languages. I don't know, Juan, what do you think?
I'll be honest. I think Gremlin is such a complicated language. I come from the RDF graph camp, and I will also acknowledge that Sparkle is very verbose and annoying with all those URIs and all those things. They're there for a reason. I mean, honestly, hats off to the Neo4j folks and Cypher, because they really designed the syntax of a language to be the ASCII art stuff, and I think just makes it cute and kind of easier to understand. And I think, hats off to them for that. And I know that they're the ones who are kind of influencing a lot of this new GQL standard, and I'm
Yeah.
glad it's more deciphered. It's not going to be Gremlin or Sparkle or any of that stuff. I mean, Sparkle's the standard itself, but yeah, I think I think there's a lot of we need to go do more research or work about developer empathy. It's like, hey, we're why are we creating this thing? How do we make whose life better? And I think if you look at it, like GraphQL was made in a way because somebody had a very specific use case. In this case, it was super specific. I want to know everything around this one thing here. So how about we create a language or an infrastructure, whatever, to go accomplish that problem? Then people are going to complain. Oh, but you can't do this and this and this. Is like, yeah, we can't because that's not the problem we're solving. Oh, but you're not thinking about the problems over. Like, that's fine. I'm just thinking about the pothole that's in front of me and not like all the stuff that's in the sky. And maybe later on they're going to run into issues. But at the end, I think at some point we start figuring out how to go converge. So I think hats off also to the GraphQL, because people are really, I see that adoption and it's solving problems and people being more productive around that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I love that you brought up Cypher, because one anecdote is that the first time I realized I wrote something close to a Cypher statement is when I was trying to describe the relationships in my data in Slack to somebody else. And I was writing out the ASCII art of how things were related. And then I was like, oh, wait, that pretty much is a Cypher query. So hats off, of course, if your design is, since their design is very intuitive to people who think in graphs.
What you were thinking, it very quickly translated into almost what the query would have been.
Yeah.
So we've passed the 10-minute warning mark here.
Okay.
And so I think actually what might make sense is for us to switch into the lightning round. Dun, dun, dun. Where we can ask some quick yes or no questions and walk you through. So Juan, you want to start us off?
Yeah, but the question I already have is not a good one because I already know what the answer is. So
but maybe everyone else might not know, so we could still do it.
All right. Well, will GraphQL take over the world of query languages?
Yes.
That was the obvious answer, right?
For those of you that are just tuning in, check out the recording about 30 minutes earlier. All right, I'll do the next question here. So we ended up not talking a bunch about personas today, but are data engineers the new data scientist?
Yes.
Oh.
I want to change my answer, but I'm going to go with yes.
No, I like it. I like this. I like this. I like this.
First instinct, but then a second guess.
Yeah.
All right,
the context of my first instinct, was like in demand job, right? I feel like 5 years ago, data scientists were super in demand, and now that demand is shifting to data engineering. They do two different things, though.
Mm-hmm.
All right, next question. Metadata-related tooling is going to be the fastest growing segment in open source in the next 5 years. Very specific.
No.
Wait, after all the talk that we've had about transparency, you're saying no?
I am saying no because I don't think that it's going to start with metadata.
How's it going to start? How's the transparency part going to start then?
I think that the transparency is going to start with systems to begin with. It's going to start with information movement through systems. Do you define that as metadata?
Yes, I would.
Well, then yes. We need a definition on what is meant by metadata.
Oh my God. Data about data, right?
Semantics are important here. That's interesting. Right. I mean, that brings up an interesting conversation point. All right. Last question here. Will open source data tool adoption grow faster than proprietary data tool adoption in the next 5 years?
Ooh. I would love for it to, but I'm going to say no because of security and compliance reasons.
Wow. That was
interesting answer.
The entire opening pitch was just debated at the very end in the lightning round. Or not debated, it was negated at the end in the lightning round.
All right. Well, one final comment here I see from Rodney, which I know Rodney, just shout out to Rodney, who's always been a live listener here. So great to see you here. Well, quote unquote, see you. If Cypher could only do federated queries, and I completely agree with that. So if any Neo4j folks are listening, which they hopefully are, because last week we actually had Emil on the on the podcast. Yeah, you guys, Neo4j folks, go get federated queries. Everybody's doing this stuff. Sparkle supports it. Look, GraphQL is not doing it. You guys better do it too. Come on. You guys are lacking. So
should we send him a text message? Is this on your roadmap?
yeah, I'm going to text them right now saying, hey. All right. Well, Tim, take us away with takeaways, Tim.
Absolutely. So, I mean, this was such a great conversation. And I've got so many good notes here. I think one of my biggest takeaways was around when we were talking about developers and how they can leverage open source better and how they can learn and how they should put it to use. You talked about focusing on a real problem and really focusing on use cases as the center point about where you're applying this technology, which tools you're grabbing for. I mean, it's so common sense, but yet so often we see in the industry people not approaching it that way. And it's the wrong way if you want to learn and if you want to be impactful and if you want that feeling of having impact. So I love that. And I love this idea of developer empathy as being the center of the learning, of the adoption, of sort of the participation in the open source community, how tools can help. I think that's a great term and it deserves to be on a t-shirt and everybody should be wearing that.
Hey, so my takeaway, my main takeaway is transparency. So how we all start this conversation, the honest, no BS is of what's next with open source and data is let's go be transparent about it. And transparency across the entire spectrum, right? How you're consuming the data and where does that come from to the way, like how is the data going through systems and ups and downs and downtimes and all that stuff. Understand how your recommendation algorithms work, right? That black box needs to be able to understand what that is. And to go in kind of an aha moment I'm having right now is to be able to enable that transparency. It's metadata, but it's really this entire ecosystem of metadata. And one of the comments on the chat was not another metadata system, but a metadata ecosystem where I can place and replace the tools I want, plug, play, and unplug. And I think that for me is like the main nugget out of this conversation. I think that's where we need to go head towards. Denise, I'm going to throw it back to you. 2 final questions. What's your advice about data, about life, whatever? And second, who should we invite next?
Yeah. So my advice about life is take a sabbatical. Well, in all honesty, the take a sabbatical comment is coming from the theme that Tim was just recapping with developer empathy. If you want to be able to have empathy for other people, first start with understanding what empathy looks like for yourself. I think a lot of people forget to make sure that they are capable of monitoring their own ups and downs sometimes. And if it's gonna be really hard to be empathetic for others when they're going through the myriad of open source software tools that are out there and how to use them when you don't fully understand what that looks like. So that's my advice. And who I would invite, Holden. I'm gonna make sure that I send a tweet out to him. We got to get Holden on here.
Awesome. Denise, this was a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for your time. I'm looking forward to sharing this with so many people. This is great.
Yeah, this is quite entertaining. Thank you guys so much for having me and letting me come over with just my sparkling water beverage.
And I got mine over here.
Absolutely. All beverages welcome.
And next week is Kirk Bourne. I think.
I love Kirk.
Kirk is just an amazing guy to just go listen to, and we're gonna be.
We're gonna try to demystify and debunk some buzzwords in the data space, right?
Absolutely. Put metadata on that list because apparently.
There we go. We got that's one. Right? We got definitely. We got like I think Industry 4.0 is one we want to go talk about. We got a couple over there. It's gonna be a fun conversation.
Awesome.
Happy Wednesday. Thanks, Denise.
Happy Wednesday. Thanks, y'all.
Cheers.
Cheers.